My name is R.N. Hopper. I'm from Petersburg, Texas, and I farm there, live there with my family, multi-generational farm. I'm very honored to be here today. I'm honored that you're here. I'm honored that you're here because we intend to have some open and honest discussions and conversations over the next 2 days about soil health. A couple of weeks ago, someone asked me if I ever got frustrated. And I'm not sure what the answer to that question ought to be, but it was more specific than that. He asked if I ever got frustrated that some people don't spend a lot of time thinking about soil health or practicing soil health. And I think my answer surprised him because my answer was no, I don't actually get that frustrated about that. And the reason that I don't get frustrated is because I used to not think about it much either. When I was younger, I grew up on the farm. My dad taught me to value the land, to take care of the land. We always tried to take as good a care of the land as possible and do the things that we believed were best for the land. And it wasn't until I was much older that I realized that we weren't always doing a great job at that. I didn't view farms as living, breathing ecosystems at that point in my life. I saw the soil as nothing more than a medium to grow plants. I went off to college, got a degree in agronomy, and at that time they taught soil science a lot like it was like a chemistry set. And now things are changing, and we realize that agroecosystems don't really function that way. And so it was actually at a conference, hopefully much like this one, where my eyes were opened to the fact that there is indeed a spectrum of soil health. And we all have a place on that spectrum, even if we don't realize that the spectrum exists. We try to be forward-thinking with this conference. And this is our fifth one. Over the past 6 years, we skipped a COVID year for obvious reasons, but over the last 6 years, we have had some difficult discussions, and we don't all agree on everything that ought to be done or that we ought to be doing. But I do believe that we all agree that we care about this land and we want to take as good a care of it as possible. And so as we go through this, let's all keep our minds and hearts open. And I would like to, we'll start off with an easy concept. Please advance. And this is one that hopefully we won't make anybody mad with this one. But the question is, what is a pangenome? And I got to thinking about this because we had a cotton board meeting in August, and Don Jones presented some information about their current research, and their focus was that they wanted to develop a pangenome for cotton. Well, advance. A pangenome, advance. If you have 3 varieties of cotton, and you consider their individual genomes, are we good? Their individual genomes, advance. Some of those genes would be unique to those varieties, and some of them would be shared. They would be core genes. Advance. And all of this genetic material together is under the umbrella of the pangenome of that species. Advance. Back. So another idea related to pangenomes, or associated with pangenomes, is relatedness, both within a species and between species. And so if you take 2 lines of corn, maize, they would share 50% of their genetic makeup, and then the other 50% would be unique to those 2 lines. There's a tremendous amount of genetic diversity in corn. There is also a concept of relatedness between different species. So 94% of the genetic material between humans and chimpanzees is common. It's core. And that explains this. So Back to the relatedness of cotton. If you consider any two varieties of upland cotton, advance, and one more, between any two, they share, it's not like corn, they share 99.7% of the same core genetics. That's a lot. Well, what about the relatedness among humans? As it turns out, humans share 99.9% of the same core genetics. Now keep in mind, this is men, women, black, white, brown, all of it. 99.9% core genes. I share 99.9% advance of my core genetics with, wait for it, yes, Brad Pitt. And I know, it's absolutely remarkable that we don't resemble each other at all. But it might also surprise you to know that even Republicans and Democrats share 99.9% of the same core genes. And not only that, but 99.9% of core genes are shared between both climate deniers and tree huggers. And lastly, even no-till farmers and soil butchers share 99.9% of the same core genetics. So you might be wondering, if we're all so related, how come we treat each other so ugly sometimes? And I'm not sure I can answer that question for you, but I would like to tell you a story, Advance. I think the answer lies in the fact that we tend to focus on only the differences. Oh, poor Rudolph here, it was probably only a single gene that gave him that red nose. But when we only focus on our differences, we're easy to divide. And there's a few bad actors in the world that like to focus on the difference and like to keep us divided. Even myself, when I first got interested in soil health, I used to kind of look at the organic guys, and in this area at least, organic guys rely heavily on tillage. And to me, tillage was the devil. And so I kind of looked down at them a little bit, and the more I've thought about it over the years, the more I've gotten past that. And there's a guy here in the room that I've had many, many discussions with named Carl Pepper. And the interesting thing about Carl is he's an organic farmer. And what finally drove this home is I realized that Carl and I have the exact same motivation. We both believe in minimal disturbance. But Carl chose to eliminate chemical disturbance, which is very harmful. And I chose to work on eliminating physical disturbance. And eliminating either of these things is very, very hard. But Carl chose the road to eliminate chemical disturbance, and he relies heavier on physical disturbance to do that. I'm coming from the other direction, and I wanted to eliminate physical disturbance, and I've relied heavily on chemical disturbance. Each of us would like to eliminate the other thing. Carl wants to figure out how to eliminate physical disturbance. I'd like to eliminate as much chemical disturbance as possible, but neither of us has figured out how to do that. But I think it's incredible that we have the same goals, the same motivation, and we both want to leave the land better than we found it. We want to make a living for our families and contribute to our communities, and we want to work for the good of all creation. So if I have so much in common with a butcher like Carl, no, just kidding. Carl sees me as a butcher too, just a butcher of another kind. What could I possibly have in common with a Buddhist Japanese philosopher that farms? Well, as it turns out, quite a little bit. I ran onto this yesterday. I've never heard of this man before, but this was just an excerpt. If you want to take a picture of it, you can find it on the internet, read the whole article. But this man died in 2008. This is a small excerpt, and I apologize. I'm going to butcher his name, but I am going to stink up on it like a stick, with a monkey with a stick on a line, and just go for it. But Fukuoka claims that farming with nature exposes the limits of human knowledge. The ecosystem that the farm is woven into consists of an infinitely complex web of interactions which are beyond the capacity of the human mind to grasp. Knowledge of nature is always hubris. One can only know, at best, a representation of nature within the mind, and the representation cannot incorporate the complexity of reality. Rather than knowing, natural farming is about being with nature and living in a way that accords with its cycles. Fukuoka is particularly skeptical of the value of scientific knowledge as a guide for agriculture. He argues that science is incapable of understanding nature, as it works with linear relationships and abstracted variables. By contrast, real natural phenomena are always embedded in much larger webs of relations. The scientist becomes boxed up within a particular subdiscipline, unable to see the complexity of nature in its totality. As such, they are incapable of recognizing the merits of natural farming, just as incapable as an Australian is of recognizing the significance of the letter Z, the most underused letter in the Australian dictionary. If you've read or shared many letters with Australians, you quickly come to realize that. But is this offensive? Is it offensive to anyone? It might be a little offensive to people that value science, and I don't mean it to be that way. But these are complex systems, and they're too complex for single-strand thinking. Things are not acausal in nature, they're multicausal. And the one thing and the one universal truth that I hope that we can come to understand throughout the next 2 days is everything is related to something else. A lot of people like to talk and use the word climate change. But really, it's just another concept associated with land stewardship. They are, in fact, one and the same. And the way that we use land, and the way that we steward soil, and the way that we support or break water cycles, nutrient cycles, has an effect on weather and in turn climate across the entire planet. And if we can remove the politics from all of it, I think that we'll be able to see that. We record these presentations. I hope that you go back and visit them sometime. But if you ever have a chance to go back and visit Dr. Zach's presentation from 2020 on the second day, he tells stories about how small things make a big difference and everything is connected to something else. I'm going to end this where I started. I told you that I started with my eyes being opened at a conference like this. That conference was a No-Till on the Plains conference in Salina, Kansas. And this was not that particular conference, but this was probably my favorite conference that I ever attended. It was years and years ago, but their keynote speaker was a man by the name of Dr. Frank Potenza, and I believe this to be universally true. All things are interconnected and interdependent across space and time. Existence is relationships among organisms, ever transforming from their birth till their death. All things are connected in ways with strands to infinite other things that we're not even aware of. And finally, the last slide, man that had a very profound impact on my life decades ago. He believed that life is a series of developmental tasks, personal choices, and responsibilities carried out in the context of relationships. And his name was Jerry Null, and he evidenced this by saying that the two greatest commandments and the golden rule are all about relationships. And so as we go through this, we didn't come here all agreeing on everything, and we certainly won't leave here agreeing on everything. But let us all agree that we try to relate to each other in the spirit of love. We're here in this world, I believe, for a transformative experience. And learning to relate well to others, to our Creator, that is what this is all about.